Hey, good morning, everybody. Hope you are doing well. We're doing great out here in Colorado, having 60-degree weather and then a foot of snow, and so we love that stuff. So just want to jump in today right into where we've been with the Sermon on the Mount. So if you've been following us, you know that we've been talking through Matthew 5, 6, and 7, where Jesus is kind of giving a description of what it means to be a disciple. He's also spending time telling the world, hey, this is what you can expect from my people. And so this is really, really important sermon where he's kind of setting the basis for who we are and what we do. Today we'll be in Matthew chapter 5, verses 21 through about 42, 43, and then next week we'll finish out the rest of chapter 5. But inside of here, Jesus talks about all kinds of really, really big ideas. He talks about murder and anger. He talks about reconciliation. He talks about lust and adultery and sexual sin. Jesus talks about forgiveness. He talks about oaths. He talks about all kinds of really great stuff, right? And we're going to hit on some of those, but what I want you to understand is that in this section, there's a bigger idea that overlays the whole thing. So you'll see it back and forth as you read that passage where Jesus says, you've heard that it was said, but I tell you. He uses this phrase 6 times in this chapter, which is really significant because anytime in the Bible somebody repeats something, especially if Jesus repeats it, you want to really pay attention because he's trying to help you understand something. In this specific situation, what's cool is Jesus is giving an explanation or a description of what he's just said previously. So if you remember from last week in Matthew chapter 5, Jesus talked about, I didn't come to get rid of the law. He says, I actually came to fulfill it. And he told those who were going to follow him, your righteousness has to surpass that of the Pharisees and the scribes, the teachers of the law. And so what Jesus is doing in this next section is he's going, listen, here's how far people took the law, but I want you to go further. So if you study out the law, one of the things you find out pretty quickly is that the Jewish people had kind of fallen, not all of them, but some of them had fallen into this pattern where it was, well, I do what I'm supposed to do no matter what's going on inside of me internally. It became an external thing. So as long as I pay my tithes, as long as I go to synagogue, as long as I read the Torah, as long as I do these things, then God is pleased with me. And Jesus comes along and he says, hey, I'm going to have followers, but if they're going to follow me, they have to surpass that. They have to go further. It's an idea that you're going to hear a lot today is go further. See, Jesus wasn't satisfied with religion. He wasn't satisfied with moral purity. He was after something deeper. At one point, he even challenged the Pharisees and the teachers of the law of his day where he said, you're like a dish. He goes, on the outside, man, you are clean. I mean, if somebody saw you, they would just say, wow, that is like a pure dish. He goes, but inside, you're full of corruption, you're full of greed, there's grime and there's food caked on there and there's stains. And he goes, outside, you look great. Inside, not so much. And so Jesus is trying to help his followers, you and I, understand that it's different for us. It's not about just the externals. Now, what happens internally to us should change the externals. But it's really about our internals. See, Jesus didn't come for obedience alone, but for obedience springing from a transformed heart. And so that's what he's getting after, right? When he's like, hey, you have to go for it. You've heard that it said, but I say this. And so I'm going to read this to you because I want you to get the statement. Jesus is teaching that following him and living right with God is an internal thing that expresses itself externally, not primarily just an external thing. And I want you to think about the way Christianity's played out in our generation, in our society, right? Where, to be very honest, we can make it very external. Do you go to church? Do you watch church? I mean, unfortunately, that's a thing now, right? Like, people who can go to church don't. We just stay home, but that's an external. It's like, well, is that all that's to it? Do you tithe? Do you give? Do you not give? Do you stay out of the shadows? And the reality is that Jesus is after way more than that. Like, yeah, you should stay out of the shadows. Yeah, you should be a part of a local church. I mean, those things are given, right? But what Jesus is after is not, hey, go through the motions and I'll be happy. Don't embarrass me. What he's saying is, listen, I love you. I want to know you. This is a relationship thing. And so what Jesus is expressing is, for some Jewish people, it had become about a religious thing. And Jesus is like, it's always relationship between you and God. It's always becoming like him. And so I think for some of us, this is why Jesus puts it at the very beginning. He goes, there's a change from don't mess up, don't break the speed limit, don't rob, don't chew, don't go with girls that do, don't do that stuff. And he's like, let this stuff deeply impact you, like inside. Let it wash the inside of the dish. So Jesus keeps saying, go further. You've heard that it was said, but I say, what he's saying is, this is how far they went. I want you to go further. One of my favorite lines from C.S. Lewis's Chronicles of Narnia, there's this phrase in there, further up and further in. It's the idea that your desire for God is such that you would never settle for where you are. You want to go further up and further, and you want to get closer to him. You want to know him better. And so Jesus applied these to all these different things, right? Like he talks about murder inside of here. And Jesus says it's not enough to not kill people. I know for some of us, we think, hey, that was a good week. I didn't kill anybody. But Jesus is going, you got to go further. It's not enough to just not take a gun and end somebody's life. He's like, hey, I want more for you. I want your heart to be different, so there's not room for that kind of anger, that kind of hatred, that kind of devaluing of the human life. And think about it. Some of us are content to just not kill, even though we walk past someone and treat them like they have no value. And Jesus is going to go further. Don't just not end the man's life, see the value in the man's life. Maybe for you, you've never thrown a punch. You've never hurt a gnat. But some of the things that you said would absolutely demolish the human soul. And so you go, I've never hit anyone, so I must be doing what Jesus wants. And Jesus is going, no, I want you to love better. I want you to deal with the source of your anger. I want you to figure out what you are afraid of, or what you think you're missing, or why you're hurting. He's like, I want you to know why you have a temper, and then I want you to attack that and get rid of it so you're a person of peace. See, I think sometimes what we're doing is going, as long as I don't erupt, then Jesus is pleased. And Jesus is like, I don't want you to be a volcano to start with. I want you to be a person of peace. And so he's telling us to go further. Don't not just murder. He's like, man, change your heart to where that wouldn't even have a place in your life. He uses another example. He uses lust and adultery. And the religious people of Jesus' day, they had this idea, right, where they're like, as long as I don't do the deed, then I'm okay. I can daydream, I can read, I can watch, I can look, I can push the line, like whatever the line is. But as long as I don't do it, then I'm okay. And Jesus says that's not his people. His people don't find where the line is so they can push it. He said his people are changed. They're changed internally to where when they look at another human being, instead of going, how could I use them? They look at them and see the value of God placed inside of them. They see that they are a daughter or a son of the king. And even in places in Scripture, it says when you see other people, you need to look at them like God sees them. Look at them like they were your daughter. Look at them like they were your wife or your sister. He says, quit looking at them like they're there for your pleasure for you to use. And so Jesus says in the religious day that he was a part of, they would go, as long as I don't actually have sex, I haven't committed adultery. And Jesus said, that's not true at all. He says, what you do internally, what you think about, what you allow yourself to do, he goes, those things are going to be held against you in the same way as the physical actions that you do. And then here's what's interesting. Jesus goes really even further in this section when he gives us no wiggle room. Because he says, listen, if your eye causes you to sin, gouge it out. Because if your hand causes you to sin, I want you to cut it off. Now, we know Jesus is speaking figuratively because all the disciples weren't pirates with hooks and patches, right? Like, that's how you would know that Jesus was speaking figuratively if you looked around and went, we were all on boats in the Caribbean. No, right? Like, what he's saying is you have to take dramatic action. You have to be serious enough to say, listen, I don't want lust and adultery to have a place in my life, so much so that I'll get rid of anything that makes room for it. I wrote some questions. I want you to think about these questions really quick. If you knew to stop sinning, you had to get rid of your phone, would you? Like, that's what Jesus is saying. How far will you go? If you knew that to prevent lust, you had to cancel Netflix or HBO, Peacock or Vudu or Hulu, or would you? If you knew to prevent sexual temptation, you had to change jobs, end a friendship, put up a boundary in your life that other people don't have to have, would you do it? And if your first thought is those are way too severe, you've missed the point of what Jesus is saying. Jesus is saying that your love for him is so great that nothing seems severe. See, I wrote this down. I want you to think about it and remember it. For our hearts to change, our habits have to change. You and I can't get different results doing the same things. And so here's Jesus saying, listen, especially for those of us out there that struggle with lust and those kinds of things, I can't break the habit. Yeah, you can. You just have to break your chain to your phone. You got to break the chain to your TV set. Maybe you have to put your laptop away and never use it unless somebody else is in the room with you. Like, I don't know what your thing is, right? But I know this, Jesus says to go further means that you would be severe and drastic in whatever it takes to have a holy and righteous life. He says, I want you to go further. It's not enough to not, have a scarlet A on your body. He's like, you shouldn't have one in your soul or in your mind as well. Jesus uses this go further idea, and he talks about other things, right? He talks about don't get a divorce. That's a big deal, right? Because we hurt each other. I mean, I've been married 27 years, I think, in July, and I know Nancy and I we love each other well, but we've hurt each other at times. And so as Jesus gets in here, he's going, listen, here's how they dealt with marriage is if somebody got upset with somebody else and they had irreconcilable differences, you went your separate ways. And he's like, that's not how it is with you. Matter of fact, one place in Scripture, Jesus actually says we get divorced oftentimes because our hearts grow hard and callous towards each other. I get there's scriptural times where you have the right to end your relationship, but even in that, you don't have to. The Bible doesn't say like if there's marital unfaithfulness, you have to get rid of each other. It says that you have a right to because that damage is pretty severe, but you can choose to love them anyway. And so here's Jesus and saying, go further in your marriage. I want you to think about like what that would look like. Because some of us, all we're trying to figure out is how we've been wronged and how we've been right and what should happen and what's fair. And Jesus saying, listen, how about in your marriage you just go further? I think any marriage that's 50-50 is wrong. I think every marriage should be like 90-90, 100-100. It should just be, listen, I'm going all out. I'm fighting for you more than I'm fighting with you. Right? He says, hey, when it comes to marriage, go further. Here's something I think that's absolutely funny. Then you get to this section where he's talking about making promises and making oaths, and Jesus says, yeah, don't go further. He's like, let your yes be yes and your no be no. He's like, if you want to go further on your follow through. You want to go further? If you say it, then do it. But he's like, don't make these big grand promises. He's like, that actually is something that the devil does to try and mess you up. He's like, don't do it. So Jesus says, with people who hurt you, right? This is that next section, which I think is interesting because it comes right after murder and adultery and divorce and making promises. He says, when someone hurts you, go further and forgive them. Go further and walk beside them. He's going to talk in a minute about this idea of love, and we're going to save that for next week. But here's what I want you to get today, is I want you to hear the big idea is this. If you're going to follow Jesus, go further than a normal person would go. Don't stop at the external things. Don't stop at, well, I went to church. Well, I read my Bible. Well, I have a t-shirt. Well, I was nice to a poor person. Like, be changed. Go further to where the inside of you starts looking like the outside of Jesus, where you want what he wants and you do what he does. And so this section, as you go back to read it, I just want you to keep thinking about go further. So 5 questions for you really quick. Where is one place you want to go further in pursuing and becoming like Jesus? Like if you had to pick, what's an area you go, hey, I want to go further here. I want to look more like Jesus. Maybe for you it's generosity. Like you go, man, I just want to be more generous. Maybe for you it is with your spouse. I want to go further. I want to look more like Jesus to him. Maybe it's in forgiving someone that's hurt you. Right? I don't know. Maybe it's in serving. So that's the first one. Second one, what stands in the way of who you want to be in Jesus? I want you to think about like what trips you up? What makes you so frustrated with yourself that you go, I can't believe I did it again. And I want you to think about like, so what are you willing to do about that? Jesus isn't into, hey, feel guilty and beat up yourself. Well, Jesus is saying, listen, if you feel guilt, let it change you. Like guilt is there to change our habits, not just to make us feel a certain way. Number 3, where do you look good on the outside, but inside maybe you have some issues? And what are you willing to do about it? If you're really honest, you go, hey, you know what? I'm actually an angry person. And while I don't do angry things, I'm internally just churning. And what are you going to do about it? Or, on the outside, I look like this great person, but on the inside, I lust a lot. What are you going to do about that? How are you going to change that? I play the victim card all the time. Okay, how are you going to stop doing that? I'm lazy. Okay, well, how are you going to get unlazy? I'm too driven. Okay, how are you going to have more peace in your life? Like, what looks good on the outside, but inside you got some issues, and what are you going to do about it? Number 4, what is a poke out your eye, cut off your hand kind of thing that you need to do but haven't because of what it's going to cost you? Like, is it get rid of cable? Is it, hey, my phone stays in public places? Is it my wife and I talk about our finances way more, and I'm open about what I spend? Like, what is it that you just go, I know that this would make the difference, but I'm not willing to because of what it's going to cost? And what would it take you to do that thing? And then the last one is, which of these sections is hardest for you and why? Is it the divorce thing? Man, I was divorced, and my parents were divorced, or, like, man, I'm in the middle of just wanting to walk away, and they've treated me horribly. And you go, so it's hard for me when Jesus says go further because it doesn't seem fair or safe. Is it the murder anger thing for you? Is it the oaths? I mean, like, what is it in here as you read back through there that you go, that's what's so hard for me? All right, I love you guys. Hope you have a great week. We'll jump back in next week as we talk a little bit about what Jesus said about loving those people around us and what that actually looks like.